Karen mocked my cousin's baby bump. She didn't know I'm a federal judge. I've presided over treason cases. I've signed warrants that made international headlines. But nothing burned in my chest like watching my cousin cry because of the shape of her belly. Her name's Naya. She's 7 months pregnant. The child's father gone car crash 6 weeks before the baby was conceived. She moved in with me last fall. She needed quiet, comfort, stability. That's why I brought her to Crest Meadow Glade. It's a manicured neighborhood, symmetrical trees, neighborhood mixers, an artificial lake shaped like a teardrop. I thought it'd be safe. Turns out, it wasn't a lake. It was a moat. And on the other side, a queen with a clipboard named Karen Donnelly. We'd been living there barely 3 weeks when the notices began. Pregnancy display must be subdued. Unattended children in womb may violate noise potential ordinance. Home occupants must match deed ownership by image profile. I thought it was spam at first, a prank, until I saw them hand-delivered, signed, sealed, folded into pink envelopes. I work out of Richmond during the week. On the weekends, I come home, cook Nia breakfast, and sit on the porch while she rubs cocoa butter on her belly and sings Marvin Gaye to the child. That Saturday was different. I pulled into the drive and found her pacing. Her eyes were swollen. Her hands were shaking. She laughed at me. Nia said, "Who the woman from across the street? Karen something." She said I looked like I was smuggling watermelons. Said it was community disturbing visual pollution. I froze. She called my baby bump pollution. Brax. I took her hands gently, and that's when I heard it from the sidewalk. "Oh, are we crying now? Hormones out of control. Better stay indoors next trimester. Sweetie?" My head turned slowly. Karen, smirking. 2 other women beside her laughing like it was brunch. That's when I stood. That's when it all began. Karen Donnelly had the voice of a suburban soprano and the cruelty of a back alley bully wrapped in lemon-scented self-righteousness. The morning after she mocked Nia's pregnant stomach on the sidewalk loudly, publicly, we found a folded pink envelope on our doorstep. Inside was a notice printed on heavy cardstock with a wax seal reading Crest Meadow Visual Harmony Council official citation and the violation unapproved display of protruding maternity figure. Section 7B, Community Cohesion Aesthetic Standards. Residents must maintain a visually balanced and peaceful exterior. Pregnancy silhouettes, particularly third trimester bellies, can create undue public tension and are discouraged from appearing in communal outdoor spaces unless dressed appropriately in harmony color codes grays, earth tones, or floral pastels. Excessive size should be avoided. It read like a manual for eugenics, but it was signed, dated, and backed by a request for voluntary community contributions to assist with HOA aesthetic oversight fees. Suggested donation, $65. I sat at my desk that evening, whiskey untouched, Nia asleep upstairs, and read that paper 5 times. Then I pulled out my laptop and started digging. First, the HOA registry. Crest Meadow Glade hadn't had a legally recognized HOA since 2019. It had been dissolved after a misuse of funds scandal that made local news. The board had disbanded. The charter retired. So what was this Visual Harmony Council, a vanity shell? Karen Donnelly had revived a dead HOA by name, created a new community standards document with vague, pseudo-philosophical language about environmental serenity, and started printing citations under a name that sounded official but had no standing in law. She wasn't a board member. She was a cosplay tyrant. And I wasn't just a neighbor. I was a sitting federal judge appointed, confirmed, and fully empowered to bring the weight of truth into spaces built on performance. The next day, I knocked on 5 doors. 3 people answered. One was a young black teacher named Jasmine, who told me her nephew had been warned not to use sidewalk chalk that might lower property value. One was a retired veteran named Hugh, who said Karen tried to fine him $85 for patriotic signage because he flew an American flag and flags promote division. And one was an older white couple, Martha and Dean, who said they donated to the Harmony Council for 3 years. thinking it was real. She said she worked with City Hall, Martha whispered. Dean handed me a receipt. It was a memo from a Venmo transaction neighborhood safety fee. The rabbit hole got deeper. That night, I printed Karen's bylaws, all 19 pages. She'd copyrighted them under a self-created nonprofit, the American Image Foundation for Suburban Cohesion, which, according to the Virginia State Registry, had a tax ID and honorary legal advisor listed as Karen Donnelly, ESC, non-practicing, internet certified. She had no law degree, no HOA authority. She'd simply declared herself a regulator and started collecting money and loyalty through a velvet-wrapped hammer. But beneath the flowery language was something sharper. One section read, visual disruptions may include aggressive colors, large pregnancies, children with unruly behavior, overly expressive couples, and clothing that draws focus from surrounding architecture. Aggressive colors, large pregnancies, unruly behavior, expressive couples. She wasn't writing guidelines. She was writing coded exclusion. I took the packet and handed it to a friend at the U.S. Attorney's office the next day. Then I sent an anonymous tip to the IRS. And then I paid a visit to Karen's porch. She opened the door with a smug smile that dropped when she saw who it was. Judge Hale, she said, eyebrows lifting. How unexpected. Are you here to apologize on behalf of your cousin for violating neighborhood harmony? I smiled just barely. No, Ms. Donnelly. I'm here to inform you that you've been issuing fake citations under the guise of a non-existent HOA and collecting money under fraudulent nonprofit status. That's wire fraud, mail fraud, and impersonation of municipal authority. She paled. I was just doing what people wanted. Order, beauty, grace. You targeted a grieving, pregnant woman for sitting on a porch with cocoa butter on her belly. I said, that's not grace, that's disgrace. Behind me, a neighbor stepped out, then another, then Jasmine, then Hugh. Karen saw them. Her mask cracked. She slammed the door, but the cracks had already spread. Some fraudsters steal with gloves. Karen Donnelly stole with floral fonts, cursive clip art, and PayPal links. By the end of the week, I had everything I needed to make the next move. I wasn't acting in chambers. Not yet, but I was well within my rights as a private citizen and a legal expert to initiate proceedings for what I now knew was a coordinated scheme of community intimidation. Karen's nonprofit, the so-called American Image Foundation for Suburban Cohesion, wasn't just fraudulent, it was a front. She'd used it to funnel donations under the pretense of community maintenance and aesthetic preservation. These funds weren't reported to the IRS. No operating expenses were filed, and worse, she used the money to hire what she called patrol proxies. These were teenage boys from the neighborhood, some barely out of high school, who she paid in gas money and community credits to monitor anomalies and document non-compliance. They weren't told what they were really doing. They just knocked on doors, took notes, sometimes photos, children, weaponized into enforcement. I sat at my desk that night and realized something chilling. Karen hadn't created an HOA. She'd created a suburban cult. So I called in help. Not the FBI. Not yet. I called Judge Inez Polanski, a colleague on the State Ethics Commission. Then I called Darlene Whitaker, my old law school roommate turned civil rights litigator. And finally, I looped in Reverend John Crowley, who ran the faith-based Community Watchdog Alliance in the city. I explained everything. They didn't hesitate. By the end of that weekend, we had a class action filing draft, an emergency IRS fraud referral, a press release prepared for every major news outlet in Virginia. But most importantly, we had neighbors. The community had had enough. Once people realized they weren't alone, that their stories weren't isolated, they showed up. Jasmine brought over her chalk-stained welcome mat that Karen called a visual stain. Mr. Harmon printed his citation for flag-based provocation. Martha returned with a trembling hand and a list of every donation she'd made, 12 payments, totaling over $700. And then there was Nia, 7 months pregnant, glowing with a quiet, trembling power. She asked me to drive her to the next neighborhood assembly. I parked the car and offered to walk her in. She shook her head. I want them to see me arrive, belly and all. The meeting was supposed to be a HOA reunion. Karen had organized it, billing it as a reaffirmation of community grace and promising cookies, iced tea, and a slideshow of harmonious living. Instead, it became the scene of her downfall. Because as Karen clicked to slide 3, a stock photo of a front porch bathed in sunlight, Nia walked in. She wore a fitted burgundy dress that showed every inch of her beautiful bump. Her hands rested gently under her belly, her chin high. The room went silent. Karen's smile faltered. Oh, she chirped. I wasn't expecting I'm not here for you, Nia said. She turned to the crowd, to the neighbors, the ones who'd received fines, warnings, stares, the ones who'd whispered but never spoken. And then, my cousin, my fierce, grieving, unshakable cousin said, this body gave life in the middle of loss, and you tried to shrink it because it didn't fit your image. You mocked the shape of a mother, you labeled her an eyesore, and you did it not with fists or slurs, but with laminated paper and fake logos. You didn't act alone. You acted in silence, and silence enabled you. I'm done being silent. You could have heard a leaf fall. Then Martha stood, then Hugh, then Jasmine, then 3 others. They didn't chant, they didn't yell, they simply walked out. Karen was left standing in front of a projector, pointing at a photo no one was looking at. The next morning, the press had the story, fake HOA leader accused of fraud after targeting pregnant resident. Citizens push back against Visual Harmony Council in Crest Meadow Glade. Mockery of a mother sparks legal reckoning in Virginia suburb. And the quote that led every headline, Nia's I won't apologize for existing in public while expecting a child. The indictment came on a Tuesday, a formal, federally reviewed document, 42 pages long, naming Karen Donnelly, a.k.a. chair of the Crest Meadow Visual Harmony Council, as the primary respondent in a multi-party fraud, harassment, and misrepresentation complaint. She wasn't in court to hear it. She was already on the run. According to neighbors, she left just before sunrise in a rented compact SUV, carrying 2 cats, a suitcase, and a box labeled Community Aesthetic Archives. She didn't even return her borrowed extension cord to Hugh, the veteran she'd once cited for overflagging. But leaving didn't mean escaping, because she hadn't just violated community decency, she'd broken actual federal law. Let me be clear about something. I don't bring the robe into my personal life. I don't wield my status like a sword, but I do understand justice not just in form, but in function. And when a woman crafts a false identity of power, exploits it to humiliate vulnerable residents, then launders funds through a sham nonprofit while issuing fake legal threats, she doesn't need a neighborly warning. She needs to answer before the court. The day after the indictment went public, I was asked to appear not as a judge, but as a citizen in front of a Senate subcommittee on housing equity and community governance. They wanted me to explain what had happened in Crest Meadow Glade. I walked in wearing a navy blue suit, no robe, no bench, just my voice. And I said this wasn't just a Karen with a clipboard. This was an ecosystem built on fear, appearance, and unchecked silence. Karen Donnelly weaponized false structure to control who got to exist peacefully in public space. She mocked a pregnant woman's body. She fined a veteran for patriotism. She trained children to report on their neighbors. She didn't operate alone. She operated in a vacuum we allowed. It's time to seal that vacuum legally, permanently, and nationally. The room was dead silent. Then they clapped. The next day, 6 more states opened investigations into similar fake HOAs. The IRS froze Karen's accounts. Her nonprofit status was revoked. 3 of her largest donors, one of whom was a city councilman, publicly cut ties, claiming they were misled by her professionalism and concern for community quality. But the damage was already done, and now it was our job to rebuild. We started with Crest Meadow Glade. The residents voted overwhelmingly to install real, accountable community oversight, monitored by a rotating board of actual residents, not self-appointed tyrants. The Harmony Council signs were taken down. In their place, an We planted a community garden, free to all, even those who didn't own a home. No fines, no codes, just flowers, just space, just belonging. Karen's name disappeared from the mailbox logs. Her fake citations were burned in a symbolic bonfire at the community picnic. Nia brought homemade lemonade and baby Naomi, now 8 days old, bundled in soft yellow. And when she stood on that freshly cleaned sidewalk and cradled her child under the afternoon sun, the crowd applauded, not just for her courage, but because we had all been changed by mockery, by shame, by rising up anyway. Karen Donnelly was flown back into Virginia under federal supervision. She was found in a small rental cabin in North Carolina, hiding out with a garden journal, expired IDs, and 5 shoeboxes full of printed compliance slips. One of the arresting agents told me she cried when they read the charges, not because she was sorry, but because she'd never been treated like a criminal before. And yet, that's exactly what she was now. A criminal. Not for her opinion, not for her taste in hydrangeas or her dislike of loud children, but because she built a paper empire of false authority and used it to harm real people. Karen stood trial in federal court, ironically not far from my own bench. Of course, I didn't preside. That would have been a conflict of interest. Instead, I watched from the gallery a private citizen, a neighbor, a cousin, and seated next to me was Nia, holding Naomi in her lap. The prosecution brought receipts, fraudulent financial transactions, dozens of forged council votes, emails where she called pregnant women walking distractions, audio clips of her directing teens to note anything extra brown or overly ethnic in style. The courtroom gasped more than once. Karen's defense, that she had good intentions, that she only ever wanted to maintain a peaceful image, that certain types of people don't naturally respect that. At that line, the judge asked her attorney to sit her down. The jury didn't look at her after that, but it wasn't the prosecutors that delivered the final blow. It was Nia. She took the stand with her baby in one arm, her voice clear, steady. When my cousin let me stay with him, I thought I was escaping grief. I didn't expect to walk into something worse where I was treated like I brought chaos with me just for being visible while pregnant. I was mocked for my belly, cited for existing, humiliated in my final trimester by a woman who wasn't interested in law, just in power. What Karen did wasn't just bullying. It was the foundation of systemic exclusion that has hurt families like mine for generations. But I'm not here to punish her. I'm here so the next mother, the next woman who dares to exist on a porch, doesn't have to fear a knock on the door with a citation that carries nothing but cruelty. When Nia finished, you could hear the sniffles in the back row. The judge wiped his eye. Karen looked down at the table. Even her attorney said nothing. Verdict: guilty on all counts. Karen was sentenced to 24 months in federal detention with 5 years supervised release and a permanent ban on organizing, leading, or financially managing any community organization. She cried again this time. Less for herself, I think, and more for the public erasure of her made-up throne. But the real victory came after. Within 2 months of the trial, Congress passed the Neighborhood Fairness and Community Equity Act, a sweeping reform package that banned unregistered HOAs from issuing citations, required transparency in all neighborhood associations' operations, created a federal resident rights portal for complaints and legal referrals, established a training and certification system for HOA boards nationwide. And at the signing ceremony, standing behind the President of the United States, holding baby Naomi, and a framed copy of the original pregnancy citation, was my cousin Nia. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. Sometimes justice is loud, but sometimes it's a woman who once cried on a porch, standing tall in front of cameras, no longer shrinking for anyone. Crest Meadow Glade became something else entirely. Diverse, vibrant, free of phony paperwork and pastel-colored fear. The old Visual Harmony Council sign now hangs in a local museum exhibit titled Paper Tyranny When HOA Power Becomes Abuse. And under it, Nia's quote, "You don't get to shame me for showing the world I'm carrying life. Have you or someone you love ever been silenced by fake authority? Have you witnessed power used not to serve, but to suppress? It's time to talk. Time to change. Share your thoughts below. Let's make sure what happened to Nia never happens again.